The heretical poisons of socialism and communism in the world today, 31 January, 2025 Anno Domini. Official publication of the Holy Apostolic See of Rome, in exile, by His Holiness Pope Jacobus I, on the subject of the manifold perversion in this world and the already fully condemned pernicious and thus heretical errors of the systems of socialism and communism, within the secular society of the state, its diabolical background in its heretical denial of the divine laws of God, and the spiritual and actual blindness of this secularized and apostasy-embracing world, to the truth and proper doctrine of the Catholic Church regarding these heretical false doctrines of socialism and communism, in their state-run directives of tyranny, either hidden and or directly manifestly visible, in their obstinate denial of the liberty of conscience in the proper constraints and sincere profession of the genuine Catholic faith, which is nothing else but Catholic tradition of all time, in holy obedience to the true and infallible doctrine of the Church in matters of Catholic faith and morals, and the Church discipline, which all of them are denied today by majority of this world.
So today we would like to present this, our publication, for the purpose of, again, showing the discrepancies in the and showing errors, heretical errors in the systems that are trying to replace the Catholic faith, which is nothing else but Catholic tradition, and that those proponents of this are not only being allowed by God to fail in those promises that they make and false promises, but in fact they are engaged in the service of Satan to destroy the human race, to decimate the established order that was established and is established by God's mercy and grace and so forth, and by the long-standing Church's influence and Church's teaching, supreme teaching authority of the popes over the centuries, all the way down and beginning with Christ our Lord and the apostles. And so these evil influences of the devil and how these perverted souls are infiltrated inside the secular power and places of secular authority and influence, therefore of great importance to the Church and to the life of the Church, because in such societies run by socialists and communists, the Church is being persecuted by not only secular laws, but the outright tyranny and persecution engaged in by the state, because the state is run by people who are convinced atheists, heretics of heretics, people who have no intention to respect the Church and obey the Church and follow what the Church teaches and so forth, or leave the Church to her divinely given mission of salvation of souls, because they themselves are atheists, so they don't believe that the mission exists, in fact, or they are not granting that the Church the liberty of fulfilling that mission, which is horrifying sacrilege and God will repay it. But before we begin, we have something that we have to address as an addition to our previous recordings in regards to, it's only a 2 minutes excerpt, but it's very important because it regards to these false pernicious errors, especially disseminated by people around these so-called Assembly of Heretics of Society in past 10th, illegitimate Assembly of Heretics, and also this person right here, Donald Simple, as you can read. So we'll let it play, and then we will present the additional. We keep forgetting about this because of being overwhelmed with work and so forth. But not that we have not addressed it. We did address it before in our publications, that what these people are disseminating is absolutely heretical, but that the people teaching is in place, and that these kind of propositions that they proposed were condemned by our predecessors, including Pastor 9 and so forth. So let us go to it first, so that it's out of the way, and then we can continue on our main publication today.
The ipso facto excommunicated said deprivationist heretic Donald J. Sanborn, denying the constraints of the syllabus of errors of Pope Pius IX, on no salvation in false religions and outside the true Catholic Church, avoid these servants of Satan as far as possible.
And if someone is saved who is in those false religions, it has nothing to do with that false religion. It has to do with the grace of God and their ignorance.
Okay. In a 1992 article on the New Ecclesiology, you wrote, if pagan idolaters can be saved, it's due to, quote, justifying acts in connection with ignorance. Please explain how faith can coexist with idolatry.
Well, in order to be saved in any false religion, a number of things are necessary. First of all, the presence of invincible ignorance. That is, that you cannot, for whatever reason, overcome the ignorance of the true faith due to the fact that no one has mentioned it to you or anything like that. So
Okay, we have mentioned this before, but just to add to this, so that it's from the beginning, this is not only heretical, but a sacrilegious attack on the unity, on the majesty of God and the teaching authority of the Church, because this was never taught by the Church, by the Roman Catholic Church, and it will never be taught because that's absolutely opposed. It is heretical because St. Paul says in Ephesians, one body and one spirit. That means one church, that means the true Catholic Church, and one spirit, that means the Holy Ghost, protecting the body as Christ our Lord promised. Behold, I am with you all days, even unto the consummation of the world, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against the church. That's the scripture reference. Then St. Paul has one Lord, one faith, one baptism. There's one faith. If anybody practices and believes something else, there's no salvation, period. So what he just said is absolutely outrageous. It just illustrates who these people are. But then we have the teaching, we want to add the teaching, not only what he says in the invincible ignorance, this doesn't exist in the sense of the faith. The faith must be practiced in order to be saved. So that's not applicable in this sense. And God will always make sure that that person is approached either by someone who is truly Catholic or approached by the teaching that the Church have always taught, and then that rejection, and of course the most important, the commandments of God. If they are not obeyed, that person is lost. And God is not protecting such people who are obstinately refusing to be true Catholic, so that they are on the way to hell, regardless. So it belongs to the mercy of God to obtain this favor from God, and if that is disregarded, then there's no salvation. So what this heretic Semborn is saying is it's just absolutely anti-Catholic propaganda, and absolutely never taught by the Church as it is. He's a horrible heretic. So let's continue what he says, because there's some more points.
that's the condition, just like oxygen is a condition of fire. But you must have the virtue of faith. All right. So the virtue of faith must have an object, and that object is at least that God exists and that he rewards those who seek him. Other theologians, such as St. Robert Bellarmine and I think St. Alphonsus Liguori, add you must believe that in the divinity of Christ and in the redemption. Those things are disputed, what you must believe, but you must make an act of supernatural faith under the influence of grace. You see, you must also have perfect contrition for all of your serious sins.
So this is syllabus of errors of our predecessor, of blessed memory, Pope Pius IX. And this is in regards to, let's see, I have to make it bigger, better videos. It's part of a video, but it's a screenshot. And it says, paragraph 3, it says indifferentism,
latitudinarianism.
and also every man, as the point 15, it says every man is free to embrace and profess that religion that's prescribed, that's prohibited doctrine, so it's prescribed and condemned. Every man is free to embrace and profess that religion which, led by the light of reason, he may have thought true. Man, point 16, man may, in the practice of any religion, whatever, find the path of eternal salvation and attain eternal salvation. So this is condemning virtually what this Semborn is saying, because there's no salvation in false religions, period. Point 17, also important, at least good hopes should be entertained concerning the salvation of all those who in no respect live in the true Church of Christ. That means the Catholic Church, the true Catholic Church, not this horrible Novus sect and these heretical assemblies. Point 18, Protestantism is nothing else than a different form of the same Christian religion in which it is permitted to please God equally as in the true Catholic Church. So this is all prescribed, and these points, these propositions are prescribed by papal authority of our predecessor Pius IX, and so therefore there's no mistakenness. And so what the Sanborn is saying is just absolutely outrageous. So then we have this teaching of Council of Trent. We'll make it bigger again, because that's important, because he says that the person who is saved must have perfect contrition, but that belongs to God to give. So that's the supernatural mercy of God, in fact. So there's no possibility of mistake again. And he's not, the Sanborn is just saying horrible things on this regard. So it says, this is from Council of Trent. The Synod teaches, moreover, that although it sometimes happen that this contrition is perfect through charity, this is regards to sacrament of penance, and reconciles man with God before this sacrament be actually received. That means being the valid absolution, which the heretics cannot give, and there's no grace of that for the penitent. So the sacrament be actually received. The said reconciliation, nevertheless, is not to be ascribed to that contrition independently of the desire of the sacrament which is included therein. What does it mean? That means that that person has to be truly Catholic, has to have desire to go to sacrament of penance, and go and be absolved by a true priest. So if that person chooses to go to heretical assemblies, there's no such perfect contrition. Or he goes to, if that person goes to people that are teaching falsehood and part of this Novus Ordo sect, but there's no solution, because that required part is that the person has to be truly Catholic. So obviously, or it doesn't know any better in the sense that the person is not absorbing the heresies and accepting them, but is seeking. That's the definition of St. Augustine, for example, of doctor of the Church. That person cannot be called heretic who is actively seeking the truth, and then when that person has found the truth, it's God, by mercy of God and His grace, that person is willing to part with those errors that were believed before. And obviously, this is a very rare situation. Most of today's world is truly accepting these heretical errors and so forth. So there's no contradiction in our teaching on the subject, because the distinction is made substantially that a person who is a heretic is resolved to obstinately refuse the correction of the Church and the proper doctrine of the Church, even when that person hears it. And that's why the cutoff is and exists, and that's so is irreparable until that is remedied, until that person is abjuring the heresy and is embracing the faith. What the Sanborn is saying on the subject is just, he speaks about the virtue of faith. No, he must have the faith. He must have the rudiments of the faith. Not everything is possible to be believed, to remember, not believe. Everything must be possible, must be believed, but not everything is possible to remember the details of the faith. And the Church never insisted on these, but the rudiments of the faith, the main parts of the faith must be believed, and therefore we have catechism that needs to be read, and that's what I've studied, obviously. Otherwise, that person cannot be admitted into the sacraments and admitted into the bosom of the Church if that person comes from heresy. But when that person is part of non-Catholic sect, like the Novus Ordo apostate sect, and it goes to their ceremonies, that's manifest evidence that that person doesn't want to be Catholic. In that case, there's no help, and there's no possibility of these conditions to be granted by God. That means perfect contrition, and obviously salvation. And that's just, it doesn't apply what the Sanborn was saying. There's no salvation outside the Church. So that's absolutely heretical. We wanted to add this, and also to show the propositions that are explicit contradiction to this what the Sanborn is saying, because that's precisely forbidden by the papal authority of Pius IX, our Process of Blessed Memory. So let us go to this, because this is an important part of our publication also, and then we go to the main recording.
The ipso facto, and declared by the Holy See, excommunicated SSPV heretic and impostor to the true Holy Catholic priesthood, William Jenkins, here proving once again, that the censure of his excommunication is proven just and true, and that those who follow such heretics as himself etc., will not be able to save their souls, as outside the true Catholic Church there is no salvation.
The question came up about the difference between the Society of St. Pius V and the Society of St. Pius X. And I mentioned some of the differences there that were very significant. But just this past week, I went to the March for Life in Washington, D.C. And on the March for Life in Washington, D.C., I got into conversation with a very fine gentleman, and he has relatives in the Society of St. Pius X. And he was telling me that he was scandalized by something that had happened to him recently. And that is, he was sitting at the table with one of his own cousins, I think it was. And it was a Friday. And the cousin said he wanted to order a steak on Friday, okay? Now, for a traditional Catholic, that is not right. We recognize the apostolic tradition of the Catholic Church. It's an apostolic tradition. That means it goes back to the time of the apostles themselves, to abstain from flesh meat on Fridays in honor of the sacrificial death of Jesus Christ on the cross. Catholics have been doing that worldwide, and it doesn't matter of whatever rite they belong to, or where they are in the world, or whatever time, Catholics just do that. And they were always known for practicing abstinence, right? It was like a byword among Protestants. Mackerel snatchers, right? We were derided because of eating fish on Friday. Fish eaters, you know. Really, we were ridiculed for that because it was so iconically Catholic to abstain from meat on Friday because it is the day on which Jesus Christ died for us. And now here you have a traditional Catholic. This cousin of his actually went to the Society of St. Pius X and was a member of one of the Pius X parishes. And he announced that he's ordering a steak on Friday.
So not once he mentioned that that's forbidden by canon law, which is right. We put it right next to it, but we'll see. We have it here. A bigger way to show it, but it's right there to testify that this person is just simply not capable of teaching the truth. It's just not possible. So that's the. This is part of the Silva Severus again. The successful injustice of a fact brings with it this prescribed and condemned, brings with it no detriment to the sanctity of right. That means that whatever they decide that is right, that stands, and there's no injury to the truth and justice in their mind. This is more of a relations to the church and state, which is condemned and so forth. Abstinence is in the yellow. Abstinence only is enjoyed on the Fridays throughout the year. Fast and abstinence are prescribed on the following days: Ash Wednesday, the Fridays and Saturdays in land. So not only Fridays, but Saturdays in land. Amber days, the vigils that's up fast and abstinence from meat. The vigils of Pentecost, of the Assumption, of All Saints' Day, and of Christmas Day. Fast only is ordained for all the other days of Lent. And you can read the rest of it. So this is Canon 1252, 1917 Code of Canon Law, which is binding. So this heretic Jenkins is not saying that it just says it's apostolic tradition, but that's not the point. And so when he's capable of saying this, then he is just misleading because that's not sufficient what he says. It's a matter of canon law of the church, in other words. That's why we put that screenshot in there, and so that he's convicted on say, sin of omission, obviously omitting the necessary part. That's a matter of canon law of the church that has to be obeyed. Church discipline and also apostolic tradition and so forth. Now, what he added in there is about the stake, somebody who is traditional Catholic and so forth. We don't have that term traditional in the church. You're either Catholic, that means you practice the Catholic faith, which is nothing else but Catholic tradition, or you are not Catholic. So those who call themselves Catholic, they are not admitted because by way of practicing, professing, and believing heretical lie of false doctrines invented by enemies of the church, they are themselves outside the church. And therefore they are not part of the Catholic Church, and they are not called Catholic by that very fact. And they are excommunicated. So what he says is just incorrect and absolutely misleading, because then we don't have two faiths. In other words, in the church, there's only one Catholic faith, and that's it. If people don't practice, they are not Catholic. So that's Catholic tradition. And so these are the invented terms on part of these heretics, because they're serving the devil and they want to destroy souls. So let's go further.
So our man was saying, well, you can't do that. That's against apostolic tradition, he told him. That is not Catholic. And the man said, well, it's okay now because that was changed. And this gentleman, I won't mention his name, of course, was arguing that that is not the traditional Catholic thing to do. And there were others at the table too who were kind of scandalized at this announcement by this one individual, young man. But he said that their priest told him it was okay to do that. And he went ahead, in spite of everything, in spite of the fact that he even knew that he was giving scandal, he went ahead and ordered that steak that day in front of everybody and ate it and enjoyed it by everybody. And the young man who was telling me this, he was telling me that they're being told that, yeah, you can go with the 1 hour fast for solid food, 1 hour fast before communion. That this is what, he says, they're being told. By all of the Society of St. Pius X priests, I don't know. By some of them, yes, he said. They're being...
He speaks about the fasting before their 1962 invalid and null ceremony, which is not a mass. We have explained this in our previous recordings why it is not mass, because there's substantial changes. It violates the constraints of Council of Trent, Session 7, Canon 13, on sacraments in general, and therefore there's no mass and there's no priesthood because they ordain people, and moreover they don't have valid episcopacy. We have explained this so many times. So why is it so? What Archbishop Lefebvre did in 1988 in Nicon, Switzerland, and why is it invalid? Because they used the form of enemy of the church, and by then excommunicated heretic, by which Roncalli excommunicated himself and lost the papacy by promulgating fraudulent and absolutely heretical Pontificale Romanum, which is visible that Archbishop Lefebvre used, because they taking turns in imposing hands on top of the head of the person being consecrated bishop, ordained priesthood, and so forth. And consecrated bishop and ordination is a little bit different. There's only one such, with the words pronounced, one such imposition. And that's more complex and so forth, but Roncalli touched that too. But this is the essential, because it destroys the apostolic succession of the church. We have explained this in our previous recordings, so just briefly. So he speaks about SSPX heretics. He's not saying they are heretics. He's not saying this matter of canon law, they cannot be. And moreover, there's another canon, we don't have it ready right now, but there's a canon that has to be from the fasting before Mass, has to be from midnight up until the Mass. So, so that this is matter of canon law. This is church law. So they don't wish to uphold it, and they upholding new disciplinary laws in regards to sacraments that were instituted by these enemies by the Apostolic sect, which is we have condemned this obviously because that's we have published in our entire publication on the subject, the condemnation of these liturgies, Apostolic sect liturgies and everything else. So they lack authority to introduce anything like this. They don't belong to the Catholic Church, and these heretical assemblies. Moreover, when this heretic Jenkins is saying these things, he's not saying that that's not possible. You see, you don't have 1 hour before the Mass when you have to stop eating and stuff and this like things. The exception is when that midnight Mass for Christmas and for Easter, which was changed and put place when it was like this previously by our predecessor Pius XII. So yes, we have explained this in our publications why it is so that the Easter Vigil Mass is being said at midnight, not as it was for several centuries on Sabato. And so Pius XII restored it back to midnight what it was previously, because the rubrics even say that nocte and night and so forth. It's in there, so it's correct as it is. And so it was perhaps for the purpose of missionary countries that they didn't have obviously access to in the times past, long centuries back, that they couldn't say the Mass because they were not enough light and those kind of things. So it was difficult. So for that purpose, perhaps it was some other reasons the Church has the authority to change the time of the Mass. But Pius XII restored it, so now it's saying. So that's the only exception as far as so then the fasting when that Mass is midnight has to be at least like 7 hours. You have to stop, and moreover, the Easter Vigil Mass is the cutoff for the fasting. So that is because especially in this what you see on the screen, the mention it says that the Easter Vigil fasting ends at noon on Saturday, but that was back when the Mass was set, obviously at that time. So during the day on Sabato, Sancta, and now since it's been set at midnight, that extends the period of fasting. So obviously you cannot be just quitting the fasting, because the Mass is the cutoff of Lent, as it is, and that's where the Paschal tide begins. That's why that's important to hold that fast until the Mass is set. So that extends the period of fasting. And that's how it was before. So this is nothing new. And we have explained this in our previous recording. So that's the only exception. That at least 7 hours of fasting before the Mass, as it is in this case when it's midnight and so forth. So no fasting of 1 hour and we satisfy. Moreover, if you go to SSPX heretics, there's no Mass. Heretics don't have valid Masses, and plus there are defects in the so-called sanctuaries that are perverted, and they have some places they even have idolatry. We have recorded this so many times. We even have footage from there which we have collected during our pilgrimage when we went on inspection, really to see what damage they have done, and including this place of this heretic Jenkins. So it's self-evident these people are not Catholic. They have these defects purposely to destroy souls. So let's continue. We have the main subject still to deal with.
Being told by some of the societies and by the 10th priest that we can go with the 1 hour fast because, after all, it was given to us by the Church and we're free to accept it. We can observe the traditional Lenten fast or not. We have a choice to make. And the calendars they put out can reflect that. If you want to follow the traditional fast, this is what you do. If you don't, if you want to follow what came after Paul VI, this is what you do. And then I find myself sitting in the airport waiting for a flight to come back from the March for Life. And this gentleman begins to tell me about this episode and how much it troubled him. And that he realized, there really is a fundamental difference in the principles guiding the Society of St. Pius V and the Society of St. Pius X. And so when I say, let's not compromise, that's what I mean. That gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. That we should follow the traditional practice of the church in their integrity and not go looking to take the ones we like and follow those traditions and reject the traditions we don't like and follow the new modernist way instead when it serves our purposes. That does not make you a traditional Catholic.
Just to address real quick what he said, no, there's not much difference. They are both illegitimate assemblies of heretics. If you go to such places, you will be excommunicated by being there because the warnings are there visible. So it's manifestly visible they are heretics. They don't teach the truth. They have perverted the doctrine of the church, and then they teach their own versions of and he's not people saying, no, it's canon law, prohibition, and you're not permitted to follow these guidance, these things, and to go and be part of assemblies of heretics who are excommunicated by the church. And he's not saying that.
For us as Catholics we believe that the traditional Catholic faith is the true faith. We believe that the modernists have infiltrated the church and our institutions and are now weaponizing them against true Catholics of the true faith. They are led by Francis Bergoglio himself. Jorge Maria Bergoglio is their leader to try to actually eradicate the traditional faith and the traditional church, replacing the true faith with his synodal modernistic beliefs, and replace the true church with his synodal church.
Okay, it's a matter of authority. He's not saying it's a non-Catholic sect. They don't have authority to do any of this. So they don't belong by virtue that they are apostate sect. They do not belong with the Catholic Church, and they don't have authority they don't have any jurisdiction and authority to do any of this. So Bergoglio is just a layman imposter. He's not even so much as a palace priest. And it's an apostate semi-Protestant sect. That's all that needs to be said. So what this Jenkins is saying is it's just not possible to happen, because if that was possible, then the gates of hell would prevail against the church. The devil would be in charge. And that's not possible, you see. That's why he's a heretic, this horrible Jenkins. And all the rest of them will follow this and espouse this kind of false doctrine. So let us go to this example on the main subject of what the title says, the heretical poisons of socialism and communism in the world today. So let us go to this.
And the example of the socialistic perversion in the present time United States, where the secular powers of the state attempt to dictate the way of life of all, even those subject to the authority of the true Catholic Church, divine institution, and this true Holy Apostolic See of Rome, and there are many more such like examples of this socialistic and communist atheistic usurpation of the magisterial and teaching authority of the Church by the secular state.
You have started a group called the Children's Health Defense. You're the originator. Right now, as I understand it, on their website, they are selling what's called onesies. These are little things, clothing for babies. One of them is titled Unfaxed, Unafraid. Next one, and they're sold for $26 a piece, by the way. Next one is No Vax, No Problem. Now, you're coming before this committee and you say you're pro-vaccine. Just want to ask some questions. And yet your organization is making money selling a child's product to parents for $26, which casts fundamental doubt on the usefulness of vaccines. Can you tell us now that you will, now that you are pro-vaccine, that you're going to have your organization take these products off the market?
Senator, I have no power over that organization. I'm not part of it. I resigned from the board.
Yeah, that was just a few months ago. You founded that. You certainly have power. You can make that call. Are you supportive of this?
I've had nothing to do with leadership.
Are you supportive of these onesies?
I'm supportive of vaccines.
Are you supportive of this clothing, which is militantly anti-vaccine?
I am supportive of vaccines. I will. I want good science, and I want to protect.
But you will not tell the organization you founded not to continue selling that product. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So then this is the consequence of these pernicious errors that exist in this world as it is. Because the usurpation of the authority is a matter of Catholic faith and morals. And the Church has the authority to condemn these errors that lead away, and obviously when they violate divine law, which among them is the government overreach and leading people into socialist society, creating their socialist society in order to destroy their chance of salvation, which is very important. Why it is important that this is not followed, because then the law of God is sabotaged by these enemies of the Church. And so we have this condemnation of the present abominations in the world, and we'll go to some of these. We have published this previously, but it's important that this is observed. Why is it so important? Because obviously people are making their own conclusions. So Canon 1, if anyone said that the teaching authority granted by God solely and exclusively to the divine institutional Roman Catholic Church can, should, or without any exception is transferred to the secular or any non-Catholic authority, and that the secular state in its so-called, quote, department or ministry of education, unquote, is the sole and only authoritative arbiter in matters of education and morals, supported and fortified in secular laws and prohibitions and mandatory code of conduct of the population, and this solely and only by the deciding rule of the secular state court system, and that the Holy Apostolic See in the person of the rightful sovereign pontiff should be and is denied the divinely given powers of the keys to teach the truth of salvation and morals by the state, and denied or declined recognition of the divinely given supreme teaching authority of the Roman Catholic Church in the rightful sovereign pontiff, let him be anathema if anyone says so. That includes these socialists. That's very observable. What is the comment on that video, on that excerpt? That's just recent. It's a Senate, U.S. Senate hearing, a confirmation hearing of future Secretary of Human Services and so forth. Like the state was entitled to have that position and that kind of power to dictate the way of life as the state sees fit. Of course, when it contradicts the church law and eliminates the church from the powers that the state overrides virtually the divine institution as it is, and the powers of the church to teach, govern, sanctify, and save all men. So we have this one first point. State to address this. State-run educational system is perverted and the cause of major disastrous calamities. It is heretical, anti-Catholic, opposed to the divine and church law, and lacks authority. Because Christ our Lord gave the teaching authority to the apostles and the successors. And go and teach all nations and so forth, whatsoever I have commanded you. So that the primary reason for human life to be human life, to try to and why we live our lives, is being subverted by this perversion of the state and intrusion of the state into the domain of the church, and taken away from the primary reason why we are in this world, and that is to save our soul for all eternity, to be with God for all eternity, which outside the Catholic Church, the true Catholic Church, without practicing the Catholic faith, which is nothing else but the Catholic tradition, is absolutely impossible, utterly impossible, period. When the state is attempting to assert its influence and sets laws that are contrary to the church law and the doctrine of the church, then this is being subverted, and the religious persecution exists, obviously, because to deprive the church, the sovereign pontiff, of this influence and not only influence of this rightful domain and teaching authority by the secular state is sacrilegious, and it truly leads to, and it's heretical, obviously. So that God will punish. So when it's lack of authority on part of the state, they cannot be and must never be educational system run by the state. It's the proper domain of the church, and if the state wants to help the church, there are certain important parts that the state cannot have any influence over that, period. But of course, this is today, this may sound as if this was not some kind of binding principle and infallible doctrine of the church, which was always upheld by the church, obviously, and respected by the state, by secular power. There were Catholic schools that were predominant, especially in predominantly Catholic countries, and the state was not involved. The church had the authority to teach. It was always respected. The ones that started attacking, and when the country fell under communist revolution and so forth, that's why the communists started perverting us and destroying, because they don't want people to be good Catholics. They want people to be subservient slaves of the communist government, and obviously prevented from any revolt and any resistance and so forth, which is the history of communism has proved this. This is the problem with this hearing that we have demonstrated, is that they take it for granted that the state has that authority, and it doesn't. It doesn't exist. It's the church's authority to teach and to, when the state intrudes in matters of dictating what the system will reflect in matters of healthcare, and dictating to citizens what kind of healthcare they are allowed to have, and what kind of system will exist in the state in regards to dictating that affects the lives of the citizens of their country. That's what the church is setting aside. The church has the authority to decide what is proper and what is, because that's a matter of faith and morals, in the sense more morals than obviously the faith, although when it reflects on how certain products are produced, if there's any part of it that was produced using something simple, using simple procedure, or parts of that were used, let us say, from through using the abortion, the fetuses and so forth, producing such particles of the product, then the church has to condemn it, and does condemn it, obviously. So let us go to another point, which is equally important, and that's perverted anti-Catholic ideologies, and not the purpose of the eternal salvation of souls, dictate the way of life in a socialist or communist country. We have partially explained this already, but because when the laws reflect the ideology of socialism and communism, which the church has condemned fully, then those who are in that influence of governmental policy and laws are obviously inserting these false ideologies and ideological points into the policy of the state, and set aside the authority of the church to protect the faithful and to have the liberty of conscience and so forth, and violate the liberty of conscience, obviously. We are aware of certain cases where this was outright denied by the state in regards to education of children, Catholic children, when the state asserted non-existent authority and actually compromised that holy right and religious right as it is, and civil rights and human rights, and asserted its influence over that decision, which belongs solely and only to the church to decide. And obviously, that was causing horrifying results and problems. And when the state is run by socialists and communists, that they don't they don't allow something like this to happen. They truly want to sidetrack the church to the sideline and allow the church only to the spiritual part, but not the governmental and magisterial part and the teaching authority be exercised, period. So we have Canon 2, and that says, if anyone said that the secular state and its executive, legislative, and court justice branches can freely, legitimately, and judicially define in law the proper and fully in conscience binding meaning of the already established term by God in His divine and natural law of legitimate matrimony, and that the secular power has authority to deny that this same legal matrimony is solely and only legitimate between two persons, a naturally born man and a naturally born woman, and or if anyone said that the use of the term lawful legitimate matrimony should be or could be applied to the sodomite and or to the so-called transgender quote unions unquote between the same-sex naturally born human persons, which quote unions unquote are not legitimate marriages and are by divine law forbidden, or quote unions unquote between one man and more than one woman, etc., and that the divine institution of the Catholic Church must be denied any or all contrary doctrines and teachings on the subject, nor any legal protection against the intrusions of the secular state against this divinely instituted sacrament of holy matrimony, which only and solely the Catholic Church and her papal authority and doctrine has authority to protect, define, and to impose its constraints and laws. If anyone attempts to do that, let him be anathema, that means cursed, excommunicated. So when that is allowed to happen, of course, in regards to the healthcare, we want to assert this, because when you have injections introduced that there's at least suspicion that they will cause harm, and that's proven by fraudulent or insufficient testing of that product, and therefore that violates the conscience of people who don't want to be injected with something that could harm them, and it in fact violates their Catholic faith as it is, because the Church does not allow people to be harmed and or to give consent to be harmed by something that could cause them medical problems and even death as it is. And what that is imposed on the citizens, that they must be injected in order to retain their employment or place in society as it is. That means that they are not, if they don't, but cannot prove that they were injected by this product, then they are prevented from entering certain places and so forth, public places. Instead of the state possesses the judicial authority to punish those who violate the state laws, which must reflect the laws of the Church. And if they don't, if they contradict that no Catholic soul is permitted to follow such laws that contradict the Church laws. And therefore there's no middle ground possible, that prohibition stands. So in regards to what is cited in this canon 2, is self-evident that when that's something that cannot be accepted, but it creates a serious problem of conscience, and the state does not have authority to proceed with this, period. But in socialist and communist countries, this is common ground in the regards to divorce, abortion, these horrifying crimes against the divine law. And therefore the Church must speak out, does speak out. Obviously, this even matter of canon law, as it is defined by the Church law, so there's no mistake in this. But when the state proceeds with these abominations regardless, then that's truly religious tyranny, and it is tyranny, and it violates the conscience, the liberty of conscience as it is, and that country is no longer a free country. It's really run by enemies, by tyrants. So let's go to another canon. Canon 3. Another point that is important, and that is truth and justice are replaced by atheistic tyranny and dictatorship of the socialist or communist-run government, and there is no turning back from it, as the devil is then in charge of such perverted anti-Catholic state. And the Canon 3 says, if anyone said that the divine institution of the Roman Catholic Church in the rightful sovereign pontiff should be denied by the secular state his divinely given teaching authority to define and teach the proper Catholic doctrines, prohibitions and constraints in matters of Catholic faith and morals, also in regards to Church's authority of teaching and upbringing of children, and if anyone holds that the secular power of the state has the sole authority to dictate how the children are educated, and that the Catholic Church could and should be legally restrained or fully prevented from the free exercise of this teaching authority, and this additionally without interference and without the state oversight, and that the Catholic Church should not be allowed to exercise this authority to teach the Catholic faithful the matters of faith and morals and any other teaching disciplines the Catholic Church chooses to impose on her subjects, and that those who are the rightful Catholic clerics and teachers authorized by the Catholic Church's rightful papal magisterial authority to be in charge of education and in directing the rightful Catholic parents or legitimate guardians in their task of bringing their children, let him be anathema. If anyone hampers that, obviously let him be anathema. That means cursed, excommunicated. Obviously, the ideologically driven tyranny, when the communist atheism, materialistic, completely opposed to the doctrine of the Church and divine law, when it imposes itself a stranglehold over the country, that country suffers tremendously, and the Church is not permitted to continue her mission. And so, in these cases, when they're permitting these kind of intrusions, including to have department of in the state that deals with health issues, even which we have to finish that doctrine as it is. The state is only permitted to intrude in matters of justice, because upholding justice safeguards the common and tranquility of the order and the order that exists in the state, obviously. That's recorded in the Holy Scripture, as mentioned by the apostles, including St. Peter and St. Paul, also and so forth. The secular sword is only for punishment of evildoers, of those who transgress the law of the state. Obviously, that's granted by God, but the authority is not granted to those who pervert justice, and then they try to impose ideological goals that are opposed to church law and divine law, and that destroy the chance of salvation, obviously. And such laws cannot be tolerated, which includes also education of the youth, because when that is run by the state, that the church loses the rightful and sole authority that exists for educating children. Of course, in missionary countries, this has always created problems as it is, and the church has to speak out. But then, by the state, if the state was run by, let us say, by heretics, then the state was somewhat more respectful. But in atheistic, communist, and socialist societies, this is absolutely set aside, and these are in fact militant enemies of the church who will not permit the church to continue her mission of salvation of souls. And the primary, most important primary reason why the human life is lived by the important part of the life, which means salvation of souls, is replaced by materialistic, hedonistic, or nihilistic, rather, ideology that dictates only those things that are for this present life and satisfies the life eternal. And then the church is obviously the victim of these horrible false errors, as the state is trying to impose them on the church and those who are truly Catholic. What must be done then? It must be resisted to the fullest of the possibility, to the fullest of and the extent of the ability of those who are truly Catholic. It must be resisted, and there's no mistaking this. So let's go to another point, and that is the infallible doctrine of the Church is purposely and deliberately set aside or even denied, and many times even censored in the socialist or communist state, and or labeled as extreme and thus anti-state oriented. We speak on the subject of the marital status and so forth. We have already addressed that, but also the imposition of the state of certain conditions of life that are anti-Catholic, including not only the violation of the liberty of conscience, but when the church doctrine is purposely set aside and is, in fact, the state imposes its own laws that violate that church doctrine, then the state is self-entitled in horrible error, obviously in heretical error, to have that oversight over the doctrine of the church. And that in itself is absolutely unacceptable. That's a tyranny, again. But that's the consequence of today, because it's more or less worldwide phenomenon. There's no country today that's fully Catholic. It doesn't exist. Moreover, the Novus sect is causing so much harm because they not only allowing these false, which they have no authority to pass judgment on anything of this, but that the Novus sect is in fact permitting this to be accepted and tolerated, and in that case, the damage is horrendous. It is truly horrendous. So let's go to next canon, canon 4. And that says, if anyone saith that the divine institution of the Roman Catholic Church is subject to the interpretation of the natural and divine law, as seen fit by the opinions, legislative acts, and judicial code of the secular power of the state, and that the Catholic Church, in her magisterial authority and the right of sovereign pontiff in his supreme legislative and judicial authority, has no say nor any authoritative voice to condemn the heretical and thus anti-Catholic laws enacted by the secular state, and that the Catholic Church should be censored and prevented from freely expressing her infallible doctrine in all matters, including matters of faith and morals, church discipline, and matters of condemnation of various pernicious doctrines, ideologies, philosophies, and opinions, them substantively, in essence, as non-Catholic, apostate, heretical, or atheistic. And if anyone said that the rightful Holy Apostolic See should be silenced, censored, and otherwise prevented from freely transmitting in any way, by any means, these papal magisterial infallible doctrines in such matters of Catholic faith, morals, discipline, and prohibitions, etc., and includes church government, obviously, which all who want to be Catholic, they are subject to that authority, to our authority, in that sense, and any other sense, obviously. Prohibitions, etc. And if anyone holds that the Catholic Church is fully or partially subordinated to all decisions, executive, legislative, and judicial, of the secular state, let him be anathema. This is just to demonstrate the carefulness we have to have, and we do have, on the subject of the intrusion of the secular state in matters of Catholic Church's government, magisterial power, doctrine, infallible doctrine, matters of faith and morals, and so forth. And that's what causes serious problem, obviously, because then the state is elevated and in tyrannical manner, obviously, because that's not possible to be tolerated as it is, and it is not valid as it is. And the state is usurping the authority of the church to teach, govern, sanctify, and save all men, and in order to destroy that and destroy the institution of God, the order that God established, and when that is accomplished, especially by people who are equipped with these horrible ideologies like communism, socialism, and so forth, then there is no remedy other than to resist and oppose it. So the next point, the socialist and communist suppression of the divinely given rights, superiority, and liberty of the true Catholic Church, and the spiritual and physical persecution of the Church by such atheistic, socialist, and communist states and their tyrannical governments. The meaning is that when the state is purposely denying the constraints of the and limitations of its power, and surpassing them by their laws that the state sees fit to enact and propose, meaning that when the people responsible for these laws, the legislative power and so forth, and the executive signing it, do not allow the voice of the church to be heard, which means that they don't even seek the proper guidance of the church, that would be the guiding principle otherwise of that those laws to be either suppressed or never enacted, or they would be amended so that they will reflect the doctrine of the church for the benefit of those who are truly Catholic and for the benefit of the common good of the state and most importantly, eternal salvation of the souls. When that is rejected by the state becomes the arbiter of all that the church does. And in that case, there's no recovery possible other than resistance, obviously, which was demonstrated by many occurrences and so forth. And then, obviously, what follows is religious persecution. We are aware of a proceeding that took place in regards to separation of the family by the state, by the person that didn't want to be truly Catholic was separated from the other party, but then because it involved children, the children were granted by the state authority. In fact, the children were denied the proper Catholic education and were granted to the party that was leaning towards atheism, which was unfortunate, a very serious problem. That means that the church authority was denied to teach the children that were baptized in the church. And so we have personal knowledge on the situation. We will not disclose any more details on the subject, but it's truly the usurpation of that authority that doesn't exist in the state. The state has no authority to dictate to the Roman Catholic Church what to do, how to continue, and how to teach the truth of salvation, which includes also education, and to have the fullness of that power to educate children, obviously. So if that is hampered by the state, and when that person responsible for these decisions decides that the church will not be granted that authority, which the church possesses all along, so the state cannot interfere with it. Then, because these are Catholic youth, Catholic children, and people who, at least one party, wanted them to be educated in Catholic matter, and the church was already involved. So that means that the state intrude on in the matters of the church, and in fact sabotage or denied the authority of the church to teach, govern, sanctify, save all men. And it's a horrible situation as it is, but that's the consequence of these communist and socialist subversion of the government and intrusion in matters that does not belong to the state to decide, including in the healthcare. Obviously, that's visible. The disaster that was created by the situation just a couple of years back, the consequences that are happening today to this day, and obviously the situation that exists in those injustices that were committed by the state when people who have communist background and ties with even to Russian Communist Party and Communist KGB and so forth, when they are in position of power to be able to use that power for that perversion, for that anti-Catholic evil, then the state is truly electing itself as the arbiter of all that is happening in the society, and then there's no recovery possible. And when it involves Catholic people, then who want to be truly Catholic, then that's religious persecution. Canon 5. If anyone said that the Catholic Church, through her rightful sovereign pontiff, has no authority to legislate and enact her laws in temporal, disciplinary, magisterial, canonical, and theological matters, and that the Catholic Church is not allowed to enact such laws, and in fact is subject to their interpretation by the secular state, and that the Catholic Church and the Holy Apostolic See could and should be penalized by the state for any and all its non-compliance with such demands and judicial acts of the state, and that the secular state is free to exercise any and all oversight over any and all matters of the Catholic Church, contrary to the infallible doctrine of the Church previously and now expressed, including the infallible prescribed and condemned propositions, proscribed and condemned propositions enumerated in the syllables of errors of our predecessor of blessed memory, Pope Pius IX, 1864, Anno Domini, effectively excluding Caesar from the matters of God and of his Roman Catholic Church. And if anyone said that the state is free to even incarcerate any true Catholic cleric for any disobedience or any non-compliance to such secular state enacted codes, laws, and doctrines, let him be anathema. It's excommunicated, obviously prevented from and excluded from eternal salvation. Such people will not be admitted into the bosom of the Church, even if they converted, until this is all remedied and they remove these obstacles to the Church authority caused by the secular state. Canon 6. If anyone said that the Catholic Church has no authority to condemn and therefore to command, instruct, and direct her Catholic subjects, including the Church's doctrine, and commands to avoid and disobey secular states' mandates and laws in matters prescribed by the Holy Apostolic See as pernicious and condemned, and or otherwise detrimental to salvation of the soul, if the Church's prohibition is disobeyed, including but not limited to the mandates of the state or any other entity that could imperil the practice of the Catholic faith and protection of Catholic morals, and thus the lives of the Catholic subjects, including while active in their places of private or public employment, which is to say, those only employment means which the Catholic subjects are permitted in conscience by the Church to hold. And if anyone said that the Catholic Church has no authority to condemn any mandates of the state involving law and penal enforcement of mandates of various medical procedures and inoculations, which mandated medical procedures by the secular state constitutes clear abuse of authority on part of the secular state, including the enforcement of state-ordered mandatory vaccinations against various symptoms or potential symptoms of viruses, which abuses of secular authority were previously fully prescribed, condemned, and reprobated by apostolic letters and other publications of the Holy Apostolic See and decrees, and thus binding in conscience all Catholic faithful to obey and follow, but those who hold to the contrary, let him be anathema. The meaning is that it violates not only liberty of conscience, but the decision of what medical procedure is used must remain within with the constraints, obviously, of the Church prohibitions in terms of moral safeguards that so not every product is available to Catholic people. But for that purpose, let us set this aside. That has to be understood always, obviously. Because leading someone to sin by enactment of these mandates or procedures, medical procedures, that could cause that soul to sin in front of God. That's the domain of the church to condemn, obviously, to prevent that from happening, to prohibit Catholic faithful to be involved in any of this, or accept these procedures and so forth. But if this is not the obstacle, if there's none of such things, but in fact they would harm them, and the state by mandating insists on compliance, then the Catholic faithful must reject it and obviously must resist it. There's no other way, unless they are held actually by the state and forcefully injected by the state, obviously. So that's obviously that's tyranny, but then the resistance must be maintained until then, obviously. So the state does not have authority to, it belongs to the faithful and doctor that to consider the proper procedure and medical treatment that is necessary, not what the state sees fit. That includes forced vaccinations that are, we have addressed this in our, that's some time ago, which was censored by one of the providers of our publications and so forth, and removed, obviously. But our condemnation of the decision of the Supreme Court of the United States in matters of these forced vaccinations and so forth, which took place in the beginning of the 20th century. And we have read the brief and read the actual decision and condemn it because the state has no such authority to demand that people are injected by things. The state has authority to uphold justice. So when that person who becomes sick or infected by an infectious disease causes harm to others by negligence, in that case, yes, harm has been done. That's reflected by divine law recorded in Holy Scripture. Then that person has to restore that damage and remedy the problem, obviously. That is the role of the state, to seek justice and administer justice, but not that the state would be allowed to enforce its own view of what needs to be done in the medical field in regards to individual citizens, as it is. That must, because that opinion is prevalent over that which they have the right to have, obviously, or they have the right to exercise, which means belongs if they are in need of medical treatment, that is between them and their doctor, provided the constraints of the church are followed, obviously. We have spoken of this. And strictly followed. So, Canon 7, if anyone said that the Catholic faithful are primarily subjects and must be subordinated firstly to the secular authority of the state, and that the Catholic Church is divinely given authority over the conscience of the Catholic subjects is only secondary or diminished or eliminated as the times progressed, and because of the general acceptance of these changes of times, so that the Catholic faithful must first and foremost follow and obey without any exception all state laws and codes of conduct, and all legislative, judicial, and or executive acts, legislative bills, or any other judgments and secular codes, etc., even if they contradict in any way the constraints of the Catholic faith and morals, and have been condemned by the Holy Apostolic See as pernicious and or anti-Catholic, and thus never be obeyed, never to be obeyed, obviously, that's a typo, never be obeyed by in conscience. And if anyone said that such laws take always precedent and are superior to those of God and of His Church, even if these secular laws, judicial acts, and legislative etc. codes violate the laws of God and nature, and if they violate the Catholic Church's doctrine, discipline, and the 1917 Anno Domini Code of Canon Law, and the Church's precepts, let him be anathema if anyone tries to force something like this on the Catholic faithful. So that when this is taking place, when the state asserts this kind of intrusion on the matters of the church discipline and church authority, then the state obviously is transgressing its own authority and surpassing it and intruding into the matters of the state. That's why the subject of this publication was so important today. We will, the final comments, we will show what the church always held, so that this is understood as such in the doctrine as it is. So we have shown this from syllabus of errors of our predecessor Pius IX, and then this is the important doctrine that we will show. We have to make it bigger a little bit. And this is all prescribed and condemned by the authority of papal authority of Pius IX, and we obviously have presented today the doctrine that is in alignment with this, and in deeper sense, obviously explained. And on the top it says, this prescribes socialism, communism, secret societies, Bible societies, clerical liberal societies. Pests of this kind are often reprobated, and in the most severe terms in the encyclical Qui Pluribus, the allocution Quibus Quantisque, and the encyclical Nostitis et Nobiscum. And so you can read the years, the allocution Singulari Quidam. It's hard to read. And the encyclical Quanto Confessiamur. Errors concerning the church and her rights, and these are errors that are prescribed and condemned by Pius IX and obvious binding conscience. The church is not a true and perfect society, fully free, nor does she enjoy her own proper and permanent rights given to her by her divine founder, but it is the civil power's business to define what are the church's rights and the limits within which she may be enabled to exercise them. And then another point, the ecclesiastical power should not exercise its authority without permission and assent of the civil government. Of course, this is obviously outrageous and absolutely not binding. So then we have this, I have the close-up somewhere here, right here. The civil power, even when exercised by a non-Catholic ruler, has an indirect negative power over things sacred. It has consequently not only the right which they call, now we can read. You can read. We don't have exequatur. I think it says, but it's corrupted a little bit. Text, we don't see it that well. But that right also, which they call appel commendabus. In the case of conflict between laws of the two powers, civil law prevails. That means that's completely condemned. This is from Summa Theologiae on the subject of our relations to God. And that's St. Thomas Aquinas. God ought to be loved chiefly and before all out of charity, for he is loved as the cause of happiness, whereas our neighbor is loved as receiving together with us a share of happiness from God. And then it says, as stated above, charity is a friendship of man for God founded upon the fellowship of everlasting happiness. Now this fellowship is in respect not of natural but of gratuitous gifts for according to Romans 6:23, the grace of God is life everlasting. Wherefore charity itself surpasses our natural faculties. Now that which surpasses the faculty of nature cannot be natural or acquired by the natural powers, since a natural effect does not transcend its cause. Therefore charity can be in us neither naturally nor through acquisition by the natural powers, but by the infusion of the Holy Ghost, who is the love of the Father and the Son, and the participation of whom in us is created charity. And the participation of whom in us is created charity. That means that charity is the proof of that the Holy Ghost, and that we speak of in matters of supernatural charity, not some kind of acquired human substitute and so forth, which is only partial or insufficient, but supernatural charity, which means the divine guidance of the soul to do the right thing in the right moment and to fulfill its obligation towards God, to love God above all things and so forth, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. So is the proof to practice the supernatural charity can only be done by those who are actually Catholic. Those who are heretics, infidels, or apostates, they are in fact incapable of obtaining it from God. It's truly that it is supernatural gift of God and the proof that the Holy Ghost dwells in the soul. And so this is from St. Thomas Aquinas, where vengeance is lawful. And it says, the good bear, that's replied to objection 2 in the yellow color, the good bear with the wicked by enduring patiently and in due manner the wrongs they themselves receive from them, but they do not bear with them so as to endure the wrongs they inflict on God and their neighbor. For Chrysostom says, St. John Chrysostom, Doctor of the Church, says, it is praiseworthy to be patient under our own wrongs, but to overlook God's wrongs is most wicked. That means when the Church is attacked, when the Catholic faith is attacked, the duty of the Catholic faithful is to avenge those wrongs within the scope, the permission of the Church. How that is done, there are constraints that exist, so that is not individualistic action unless that's required, and in a matter only permitted. That means that the same level of, if that is possible to be done, the same level of resistance as that itself initial attack is taking place, and so forth. And then the reply to objection 4. Sometimes a wrong done to a person reflects on God and the Church, and then it is the duty of that person to avenge the wrong. For example, Elias made fire descend on those who were come to seize him. Likewise, Eliseus cursed the boys that mocked him, and Pope Silverius excommunicated those who sent him into exile. But insofar as the wrong inflicted on a man affects his person, he should bear it patiently if this be expedient. For these precepts of patience are to be understood as referring to preparedness of the mind, as Augustine says, and so forth. It is important to observe that the upcoming situation of the communist persecution of the Church, which exists because of this Novus Ordo sect, is inflicting itself its evils on the Church and is perverting doctrine and, in fact, not raising the voice as they are outside the Church to begin with, this horrible sect, and not defending the Church. That's a mark of heretics. They do not wish to defend the Church. And therefore, the Church is truly bound to raise her voice, but in the sense of proper resistance and instructing the Catholic faithful how that is done, how that is properly maintained. And if this is rejected, obviously, then the God is offended. And those who do not do the right thing and do not defend the Church and the Catholic faith against these usurpations and enemies of the Church and so forth, even if they are embedded in their certain means how to do this, even if they are in places of public sphere and influence in government and so forth, by the authority of the Church, when their evils are condemned and they are thus causing harm to the chances of eternal salvation of souls, the Church has the duty and authority to speak out and condemn such evil influences. And when we speak of this, we have omitted a little bit of the certain practice that exists in certain parts of the world in trying to influence the children in acceptance of changing their God-given by natural law given, but God-given sex and how they were born, in a man or woman. And therefore, it is not the authority of the state to define it otherwise, or to even try to define it in any other way, but as the church has, the state has only authority to accept that and to uphold it, not to try to define it, because that actually the state lacks the authority, because the state does not have the teaching authority. On the other hand, the Roman Catholic Church, the true Catholic Church, in our person as the right sovereign pontiff, we have not only the duty of apostolic office, but also the authority, the supreme teaching authority, the highest authority on the face of the earth, to define these things. That is what is not matter of divine law and natural law, and so forth. And therefore, we have the duty to condemn those things that oppose it, and which includes proclamation of the state. And which, even if it's correct proclamation, the state does not have authority to introduce such proclamations, does not have the authority to uphold anything contrary to what the church teaches in the doctrines and so forth. When that happens, in itself it constitutes intrusion in the matters of the church, and in fact attack on the authority of the church, which we absolutely condemn by apostolic authority. So if then anyone decides to follow what the state dictates, and we have addressed countless examples in our previous publications, so this is just a summary of what we have done, then that person is enabling these heretical poisons of socialism and communism in the world today to exist, to thrive, to increase in magnitude, and so forth. And because the situation in the United States and Northern America and South America and Europe, that when the countries are mainly socialist, the policy of the state reflects that horrible ideology that the state is in charge of your lives, and then the state in fact inflicts slavery and violation of the liberty of conscience and detrimental action in regards to the authority of the church, which not only hampers the authority of the church, but in actually as preferential treatment of the state contrary against the church authority. And such authority of the state is therefore null. There's no possibility of any compromise, obviously. There's no possibility of compromise on this subject. And this is from our predecessor, blessed memory, Pope Leo XIII, in his encyclical Diuturnum Illud on the origins of civil power, 29 June 1881, Anno Domini, he wrote point number 15. If the will of the rulers is opposed to the will and the laws of God, which includes the doctrine of the church, obviously, when we have explained this, obviously, but that's the important part. Laws of God, they themselves, the rulers, exceed the bounds of their own power and pervert justice, nor can their authority then be valid when where is no justice is null. That means that authority is only granted by God to those who uphold justice and truth and do not attack the church. And they do so based on their atheistic ideology, which these systems of socialism and communism espouse. Then they pervert justice, and therefore they do not have authority. That means that all states that were ever run by communists, they had to usurp the authority, steal the authority, and they do not possess the authority. Therefore, all communist and socialist states, in the sense as they are structured, because socialism is only a stepping ground towards communism, and usually the socialists are secretly communists and strive to increase that level of socialism to the point that where they achieve, to them, obviously, the complete superiority of their government and irreplaceable conditions that will not grant any opposition, any voice. So far, we see such countries today, and it's increasing in this world today. So that's why we are, another reason why we are publishing this today, which is important warning to those who remain inactive or sort of in a state of indifferentism or apathy and so forth in these kind of dangers, because the time of the Antichrist is approaching. And so such authority is null. When that authority is used for evil, tyrannical, atheistic purpose. And when that authority is used against the church to dictate to the Holy Mother Church what to do and what the boundaries of the church's authority are, which the state, secular state, has no authority to define. They are defined by divine law and church doctrine and church law. And the church is higher in authority than the state, always. So for the purpose of today's publication, we would like to conclude that this situation is approaching today, that the church is, we are true in the catacombs as the right one true sovereign pontiff, true in our exile, and most of these countries, all the countries in fact, that are in this world are recognizing non-Catholic sect as Catholic, the impostor sitting in the Vatican, and but the church has not relinquished the authority, nor is it possible for the church to do so. And most importantly, non-Catholic sect is not part of the church, and most importantly, non-Catholic apostate semi-Protestant sect of communist agents is not in charge of the church and never will be and never was. And therefore their authority is null, they don't have any authority, and those states that are recognized as will not be obtaining any diplomatic connections or diplomatic relationship with this Holy Apostolic See, the true Holy Apostolic See of Rome, and God will punish this world in horrible chastisement because they, professing themselves wise, have subverted the existing order. Those who are guilty of such sacrilegious new vision of life, as it is, as they could call it, and a new way of life which they pervert and absolutely subvert the existing order established by God and upheld by the church. And then they will be visited in horrible punishment when God finally visits this world in equity. And that should suffice today.